Hey there, welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. My name is Veronica, and today we are talking about death, which is a topic that I never thought I would actually be talking about on this channel because it makes me super uncomfortable, and if that makes you uncomfortable too, don't worry, you are in the same boat as me. Today is going to be a very informal chat, nothing garden really related here today, just around the things that have been happening in my life and what I've been wanting to share with you guys that I've taken away from these experiences. I do have some notes here on my phone that I jotted down, but it won't be as like teaching as my other videos. It's just kind of, chatting with you guys. So first and foremost, what has been going on that I'm making this video? Well, my grandmother passed away recently, and that took a toll on the entire family. And around the same time, I had a miscarriage, and that was really difficult for us as well. Now, I do also butcher out chickens on a regular basis. If you guys follow along the channel, you probably know that I have talked about on this channel and shown you guys how to butcher out chickens, which is another aspect of death. However, I think in my mind, these three aspects of death are quite different. They're all in the same range, but they are at different ends of the spectrum. And I just want to share with you guys what I have gathered from each of them, because it's something that we don't really talk about too much. Yeah, we publish videos on, how to butcher out animals, but the other aspects of that, right? Like what we gain from that, what we lose from that, what we take away and learn as human beings from that is something I think is not really talked about, mainly because it's hard to talk about, right? So I am actually a therapist, all right? That's not what I do now for my day job, but it's what my degree is in. And even for myself, it is difficult to talk about death and dying and everything surrounding that. So it's taken me a little bit of time to make this video because I wasn't sure I had the right words, and I probably still don't, but I'm gonna try to convey as much as I can from each of these things that has been going on lately. So I decided I will go in order. I will start with the death of my grandmother, which is like the main one lately. I'll also talk about my miscarriage after that, and then the chicken butchering thing, because I know that there are people who are going to say, well, how can you be so uncomfortable with it if you're the cause of butchering out animals and that sort of thing. So I'll talk about all three. First up, my grandmother was 97 years old, all right, which is quite up there in age, all right? So it's not like this is a freak accident. It's not like, she didn't live a full life. She 100% did. She lived a full life. She was 97 years old. The way that she died is she got sick, all right? She got pneumonia. Other than that, she was fairly healthy up until about last year, where she had a heart attack and had AFib. And if you're not familiar with that, like, I have no idea what most of this stuff means. I've been learning over the past year. It's something that people, happens to people when they're old age, usually in old age. And it's like an abnormal rhythm of the heart. And so she had that, and then a lot of other medicines along with that. And we're not a fan of taking medicine. So this is the first time at 96 years old that she'd had to deal with that. The main reason being is that she cooks and does all the stuff at home, right? She doesn't go out to eat. She's never been the kind of person, we've never been the kind of family that, eat processed food a ton. So growing up, that was very much instilled in my life. She cooked every single day, multiple times a day, and we ate whole foods. We ate things that have one ingredient, beans, chicken, stuff like that. Nothing that has like 20 different processed ingredients in the label. So then fast forward to this year, she caught pneumonia and she got an infection, and then just ultimately was not able to recover from that, but she was otherwise healthy. A lot of the same principles that I've seen in, why she lived to be 97 years old is also something that I've heard of in other parts of the world, right? Like I think it's called blue zones, where people habitually live to be in their 90s and above. And it's just a way of living, right? Like eating, cooking, and being holistically healthy, and these people just live well into their 90s and above. The same thing with my grandfather. He lived to be 94, almost 95, so it runs in my family, but it's definitely something that I've tried to incorporate into my life because not only do I want to live into my 90s, hopefully, but I also want to be as healthy and holistically healthy as possible, not just, in my 40s and 50s and taking medicines. I don't take any medicines now, and it's something that I know a lot of you probably also resonate with. So when it comes to somebody in the family dying, right, even though it's not unexpected at the age of 97, I want to say it was traumatic, even though it was expected, in the same way that if you've had anyone else die in your family, it's going to be traumatic for a little while, and you grieve and you move past it eventually and you remember that person. But I definitely felt myself being moved in a different way because we have been homesteading. Don't mind Milo if you can hear his paw prints or his footprints or whatever, his paws walking around, his nails on the floor. He's moving back and forth in front of me. But I find myself being very influenced by having butchered out animals and living this sort of life. I find myself being influenced when it came to both my grandmother dying and my miscarriage, because I understand more that it is a circle of life. And as much as and of course everybody doesn't want that to happen, it is something that happens to everybody and something that happens all throughout nature, right? You plant seedlings die, animals die, you butcher out animals. But even with, chicks that I hatch in my kitchen, some of them just don't make it. And that's hard to comprehend the first time, but it's something that is part of living, right? You don't get to live unless you eventually get to die. So that was difficult to come to terms with that, especially because, she lived with me. She was one of the main people in my life, and I was really close to her for the entirety of my life. So when it comes to homesteading, I think that has really helped to have not a better understanding, but to process it better, right? This idea that it is something that happens, and it's something that you get to see happen to everything. So when it happens to somebody who you're close to, even though it's difficult, it is not this far away removed concept, right? So I believe that talking about death and dying and life and living and all of the other stuff, including the death of a loved one or a miscarriage, for instance, is important, because if you make something taboo, then it's something more difficult. It's like over here in the corner somewhere, and that in itself, the idea that you can't talk about it, makes it more difficult to talk about, makes it more difficult to connect with, more difficult to comprehend, and it just creates this distance away from that topic, and that in itself, having that distance, makes it more traumatic, more difficult. I hope I'm making that as much I hope I'm making as much sense as it does in my head. But for me, at least, the concept and seeing all of these other aspects of homesteading and gardening and raising animals for meat, all of these things have really helped when it comes to the death of somebody that you love, because you're seeing it in a general overview sense of this is part of life, right? You see chicks hatch, some of them don't make it, you see them die, you end up having to, make a humane decision to put some down, stuff like that. The same thing when it comes to an animal, any other animal or a pet or anything like that. It's difficult, but I hope that in talking about that and being okay with that, allowing yourself to sit in the sadness and allowing yourself to talk about and process and think about the sadness and not just pushing it away. I hope that other people hear this and can come to terms with that, as I am starting to. It has been really difficult to talk about and I don't want to say get over, but it's been really difficult to process that. However, I think that having this other thing here, right, homesteading, I think that has really helped to shape my idea about death in a way that it makes it easier to process overall, so that when this did happen, it wasn't as hard as other things have been for me in the past. And especially this one, it was with my grandmother. So that I thought was going to be much more unsettling, and it definitely was traumatic, but I have come to appreciate that as part of life. Which brings me to the miscarriage that I had. And I know that this happens to a lot of women. So I am not by any means saying that this is a unique situation. It is definitely not. This happens to up to 1 in 4 women, as I have come to learn. And if you didn't know that, right, it's probably not your fault. I did not know that, and it's something that we don't talk about. This idea of having children and having miscarriages along with that is very taboo. And one of the things that I hope to relay in this very informal video chat thing is that it's okay to talk about that. And I had a miscarriage. I know other people who have had a miscarriage, but immediately when I had a miscarriage, other women who have also had miscarriages that are my friends reached out and start talking about this as if it's like this little club, all right, that welcome to the club, you know, now we can talk about it. But other than that, it's not really talked about. And even when I was doing research before and during and after, it's something that's very hard to pinpoint and something that's very hard to get information on. So there was no specific reason for my miscarriage that I'm aware of. And hopefully everything, you know, will continue on being fine and we'll have a baby down the road. But I want to talk about it just for the simple reason to talk about it, because I want to make it less taboo, right? If you say you had a miscarriage, people kind of like, oh, they're not sure what to say. And I've been there, like somebody says that to me, that's difficult to respond to. But one of the first things that I and Alan, my husband, decided when we got pregnant was that we were going to tell people, even though it was early, right? Like early, way before 12 weeks. And one of the main things that we discussed is what happens if something happened, right? And this was before the miscarriage, right? What happens if we have a miscarriage? What happens if, you know, we have to go back and tell people that we had a miscarriage afterward? And I think that that's the main reason people don't tell, you know, their family and their friends and coworkers and all the other stuff up until that 12-week mark, because the risk goes down and, you know, it's less likely to happen. But a long time ago, way before all of this, I had read something online that said, well, this person was talking about how they told everybody in their family as soon as they found that they were pregnant, because they wanted to express their love and their excitement over this event, over this new life. And if that life was very short, like a miscarriage, then they would, one, have a whole bunch of friends and family around them to, you know, be supportive and talk and that sort of thing, so they wouldn't be alone. But also they would shed light on the fact that this is a common occurrence. It's not uncommon at all, by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. It is not uncommon for women to have miscarriages. And anything that tells you otherwise is not true, simply put. And then the third reason that they opted to tell everybody is because no matter how short that life was, they got to celebrate it. And they got to enjoy it for as long as it lasts. And that was really what resonated with me. And we decided, me and my husband Alan, we decided to tell people as soon as it happened. And I'm glad we did. We told our friends and our family. And then shortly thereafter, we had to circle back around and tell them when they asked, you know, we had a miscarriage. And we told our children, right? So my stepchildren, Alan's girls, we ended up telling them, even though they're young, and we had to go back and tell them. And yes, that was very difficult. But one of the main reasons that we chose to do that, even though they're kids, right? They're 12 years old and 4 years old. We chose to tell them because, first of all, they're women, all right? And eventually they have a chance of this happening to them later on down the road, many, many, many years down the road. It is not uncommon for this to happen. So when they grow up, and if, God forbid, this happens to them, they will know that it is not because of them. It is something that is common, all right? And they remove the stigma, remove the taboo from it. So they incorporate that into their understanding from this young age, but also because they will then go processing this, all right, as something that's okay and does not impair you or impede you from having a normal life or a normal pregnancy or whatever else. So while it was difficult to explain this to a 4-year-old and a 12-year-old, that the baby went to heaven, it was something I think that we would wholeheartedly do again, because it allows them to expand their horizons, expand their worldview, and then also remove the taboo around it, which I think we need to do. In my opinion, as a whole society, we need to remove the idea that it is abnormal for women to have miscarriages, because it's not. It's very normal, unfortunately, and a good percentage of pregnancies end in miscarriage. And I think the idea of shading that away or not talking about it is a mistake, in my opinion. I'm sure there's people who disagree with that, but in my opinion, if it's going to happen to a quarter of the female population, up to a quarter of the female population, then it's something that we need to talk about. And I am volunteering to talk about it. So in addition to those two things, which unfortunately ended up happening about the same time, which was, not my favorite turn of events, but I do want to relay that back to homesteading and this idea that life continues on and it's part of this circle of life. All right, so I and my family, we eat meat. All right, we choose to raise our own meat for consumption. All right, we raise chickens for eggs. We also butcher out chickens and eat them. All right, so we take the chicken egg and we incubate it. We raise those chicks. We do not name them. We learned the hard way. And then we raise them to butcher them out specifically for the purpose of eating meat for the table. So that being said, I find personally that it was really difficult to make that decision and implement it. All right, the first time I butchered out any animal, it was actually a quail, and that was a difficult thing to do. It took a long time to decide to go get the animal out of the little crate thing that we had. It took a long time to, gather up the nerves to do it. It took a long time to get over having done that and processed it and watched it and the whole bit. All right, so I feel, for myself at least, that actually helps, all right, for lack of a better word, it helps to understand this cycle, right? So how can you say that, death makes you sad when you process out animals for consumption? And I know that that's something that is going to be brought up. Well, because as far as me and my family, we eat animals, and that is something that has to be done in order to be able to eat the animal. However, that does not mean that we are ungrateful for that life. That doesn't mean that we don't pray over that animal. That doesn't mean that we don't value that relationship with that animal. On the contrary, having raised our own animals for consumption, for eating, we have that relationship and we get to watch them and we get to see, how they grow up. We get to see how they're raised. We get to, understand the animal even more fully than if we're just buying chicken from the grocery store. So that in and of itself, I feel, has definitely had a big role on how I process and how I look at death. All right, because even in terms of a miscarriage, where you're talking about that it's very common, it's still a difficult thing to understand. But if you relate it back to the rest of the animal and nature world, all right, so to speak, you're talking about, animals that don't make it as well. I hatch out chicks all the time, and some of them don't make it out of the incubator for whatever reason, all right? Lots of different reasons. And sometimes it's something that I did wrong, and it's sometimes something that couldn't have been prevented. It just wasn't a good enough egg to make it. All right, so that bringing it back, and I know that people and chickens are very different before everybody starts commenting, but even that concept has really helped me to process this, because not all eggs, whether you're talking about people or chickens, not all eggs are meant to survive. The same way you plant out seeds in the garden and some of them don't survive. And we roll with it and, you know, we replant them and that's okay. And it's just more difficult when it comes to people than the rest of the nature world for some reason. So I do want to share that insight, right? I may not have it all figured out and I'm definitely still processing a lot of this grief. It's not to say that I'm all cured and I've got it figured out. No, that is definitely not the case. But if it could start with me saying, hey, you know, this is something that I am willing to talk about. As uncomfortable as it is, sitting in front of a camera with my lights right here, talking and putting this out on the internet, if that can be something that helps another person and removes that taboo for anybody else, even just one person, I find that to be valuable. So that has been my entire little TED Talk here. That's all I had to express. I would love to hear you guys in the comments below, you know, if that's something that you've had a similar experience with. Do you find that, you know, gardening and homesteading and this, you know, life cycle, everything with homesteading has influenced how you feel about death and life? I would love to hear about that in the comments. I hope that you guys enjoyed this really informal chat. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Thanks.